As a generation-defining game, Shadow of the Colossus has held firm as one of the most critically acclaimed IPs in history, commonly being pointed to as the headlining title of the star-studded PlayStation 2 lineup. With its mysterious, minimalist story, barren open world, unique visual design inspired by the American Midwest, and impossibly simple yet creative gameplay, without question, it is indeed one of the most notable and memorable titles of all time, serving as direct inspiration for fellow award-winning games such as God of War 2 and 3, Breath of the Wild, Elden Ring, and Pray for the f***ing gods. Playing as Wander and Argo, you traverse the vast Forbidden Lands, defeating 16 unique, sometimes great and other times horrendous colossi in an attempt to resurrect the entombed girl Mono.
To me, Shadow of the Colossus is like the Stonehenge of video games. It's this strange, fascinating, mysterious thing that always seems to have some secret or another left unfound. I'm of the firm opinion that there will never be another game quite like it, and might even make a video on that matter someday. For now, though, we're solely concerned with the quality of the colossi. As you'll see, there are positives to nearly every colossi, although we'd be lying if we said it was nothing but quality showings the whole way through. That's enough introductory babble, let's get into it.
The bottom group of colossi are seemingly objective in terms of those within, but of course the order varies from person to person. While Phaedra isn't my, say, bed of chaos, the difference between it and this game's personal power bottom is quantum. For some reason, this was the boss chosen for the remaster's E3 demo, probably putting away more customers than Gucci's sweater scandal with its unreliable gimmick and overall hastily boring design. Originally, I was gonna do one of those very overused jokes where you say, like, never seen X before, and then elaborately explain what goes on, but anyways, sort of long story short, it's not that funny and wastes your time. Instead, I'll leave it at that the mechanic is extremely fickle and usually boils down to luck of the draw. In my unrecorded gameplay case, I had to run through one end out the other 6 times before Phaedra even gave me the chance to hop on top, until I missed its fur coat and had to do it all over again. The weak spots are generic, and while it was intended that each colossi be a solvable puzzle, this is the Enigma equivalent to an everlasting gobstopper. Outside of leg design, I'm not kidding when I say that, Phaedra has absolutely zero redeeming qualities, rightfully finding himself as the dung eater of this game's fantastic boss lineup.
I hated this guy back when I first played the game, but now that I'm a lot more experienced, I'm just kinda neutral on it. I still think they should have stuck with the larger sized colossi all the way through for the sake of consistency, but I do understand the desire for colossi lair variety, and they already had put a big guy in a building earlier with Barba. The setting of a desert pit is undeniably cool, but after that the praise runs dry. The trick of using a fallen torch to spook him off the cliff isn't bad, but it's a bit dull if you start the process too far away from the ledge. Getting that torch in the first place requires tricking Colossi into ramming the torch pillars, which is complicated a bit by the boss's attack speed. A commonly lamented issue is that the rate at which the boss attacks you is roughly the same as the base recovery rate, giving it stun locking capabilities if you don't know the button mash trick, which is never formally explained to you. Unfortunately for Zenobia, I know another trick or two the game doesn't explicitly tell you about, which let me kill him so fast he didn't even make it back to the main room before getting killed. Sometimes it really does pay to read speedrun guides in your free time. There's a lot of talk about how bad you feel whenever you kill a Colossus, but this is one I always relish killing myself.
A neat mechanic only beaten out by far worse counter mechanics. Bazaron is the only boss fought on the infamous spice mines of Kessel, and the geezers that follow make for a pretty fun time baiting the creature on top of one so it gets knocked over. However, it's the in-between that ruins this fight for us both, namely in its glass half full or glass half empty approach to its long-ranged attacks, with them going on streaks of hitting without mistake and other time missing by dozens of feet. Speaking of, when you do eventually tip the cow, my most dreaded mechanic of shooting a boss on an angled limb returns, although once the puzzle is solved, the fight is all but over. I don't know why Eco decided to give the soul head point as much health as 5 other individual weak spots, but climbing up the rising, raging colossi makes for a great visual experience, and while not memorable, Bazaron is enjoyable past the low quality design flaws.
As the second Colossus in the game, you can hardly expect lights and thunder. Nothing really wrong with him, but the awe of climbing up him after poking his feet with arrows doesn't really astound me to begin with, and definitely isn't too interesting on repeat playthroughs. There aren't any cool tricks to this fight like there are with some of the others, but nothing is actively unpleasant either. If this is actually anyone's number 1 pick, I'll eat a rock and film it for our next video.
Yeah, I actually really enjoyed this fight. But as is the case semi-rarely with our dual rankings, sometimes opinions are guttered for the sake of continuity and Hydrus finds himself at a low but fair spot. His theme is eerily reminiscent to me of Dark Souls 2 for some reason or another, keep in mind that being my favorite Souls game, and the added intensity to it once Hydrus rises from the depths of the lake is another notable inclusion. It is a fairly straightforward encounter. Hydrus is a giant water snake that has electric spikes taken out by weak spots, i.e. it's a gigantic linear path. In terms of getting shocked, luck does occasionally play a factor, but the main challenge comes in timing when to climb, run, and attack, and also when to grab hold of the beast's mane so as to not get life-savored by the lack of underwater swimming featured in the game itself. Hydrus is the first so far, in my opinion, to have no truly negative faults, a commendable praise of the game's overall boss catalog considering how early on we are.
This in fact isn't a reskin of the similarly named Colossia, but you'd be forgiven for thinking that considering how they look almost identical from a distance. The other small Colossus, kinda funny to say in it, is a bit better but not by a mile. A platforming boss isn't a bad idea, but I think they could have spruced it up a bit. Baiting Zenobia into knocking down the big pillars was cool once or twice, but contrary to the developers' belief, it does not in fact get more fun each time you do it, whereas at its welcome maybe around the 4th jump if I'm being generous. I was just entertaining myself aimlessly shooting explosive arrows half the time. Actually getting Zenobia to stun himself in the second part of the fight is a bit of a hassle too, due to how godlike Zenobia's tracking is. I just stand on this one thing near where you bring the roof down, which works way more easily than the pillars outside. Props for the gorgeous arena though. The forest ruins preceding this fight is one of the most beautiful areas of the map in my opinion, alongside the E6 desert and the G7 hills. I think it would have been a lot more interesting to see another Colossus in the place of this one, although honestly the incredible amount of cut content makes this game even more interesting to me. As I said in the intro, I see it as the Stonehenge of video games. It's very mysterious and there's nothing else quite like it. Unfortunately, the verdict on Zenobia being a boring and occasionally frustrating boss is very open and shut with no mystery about it.
In a shocking twist, Alex and I put a tutorial boss in a respectable spot. Is this to be expected? Absolutely, and it's a totally fair point that all introductory bosses are simple and easy. I'll just list them out here. The Asylum Demon, Vanguard, Last Giant, Udex Gundyr, Cleric Beast, Ten Piedad, Second Sister, even the Satyr. I mean, I don't know, we're definitely soft on them, but there is something intrinsically special about first bosses. It's like losing your virginity, and that's where the comparison ends. Valis is extremely simple and exists to literally direct you to victory. It's sort of a genius niche art to be able to master a tutorial boss, and Valis is a great example, an overtly simplistic design from a poly and gameplay perspective, and mechanically is a walking path teaching you the ins and outs of the game's combat. Yes, it's easy as all hell and double as simple, but as the first baby steps into the larger frame of Colossi, Valis is a fantastic beginning that has the perfect amount of atmosphere fit for the introduction.
This is the most puzzling Colossus, I'd say, along with Argus. It's not exactly unintuitive, and the hint you get from Dorman is borderline heavy-handed, but it's still very unlike the other Colossi. You can hide and do all that stuff, or just swim to his back like I always do, which is both easier and faster. From there, you just whack his hard teeth to make him walk to the pillars, hide behind the center thing until he jumps and exposes his belly, then take a few stabs at him. The belly is the most satisfying spot for a sigil in my opinion, so I'm a fan of that. The unique mechanic of controlling where Pelagia goes is definitely interesting, but not quite intense, and is actually dead simple once you know how to best handle it, so it's a bit repetitive once you've got his number.
This thing is epic. Not in a fun epic way, more of a monumental or grandiose epic. I'm not huge on the PS3 Demon Souls Vanguard-esque theme, but it works decently. The main issue is that it's too slow, so the chase doesn't have the same sort of effect as more fast-paced ones, take any from an Arkham game. Checks out, but it would probably be far more aggravating if it was quicker, so, we have quite the conundrum here. But as is, the Nothing Chase leads to a Luke and Rancor bit where you hide and wait until he peeks under the structure so you can climb up his beard. I did really enjoy finding his weak spots, especially on his hand, and the variety in that department alone is my reasoning behind it being in the top half of the list.
This is probably the most action-packed fight because you always have to be on the move or you'll get, I don't know, eaten? Never actually been caught by Dirge. Once you get a grasp of the weird way the horse controls, where camera movement doesn't change your input directions, it becomes much easier to handle. Playing sharpshooter is intense and satisfying when you pull it off, even if it's not too challenging. I also will give props to Dirge for probably being the hardest Colossus to kill in one cycle, due to the extremely precise stab timings you need to keep him stun locked. The process to get him vulnerable is pretty fun, so I don't mind running through an encore though. And of course, as I've said many times, deserts are cool, and this is like sort of a desert. Speaking of deserts.
I think the visual design of Phalanx is fantastic. It's reminiscent of the mechanical dragon from Rayman Legends, or rather the other way around. And to the shock and awe of many, a horseback boss was actually quite fun. As I said in our Pray for the Gods video, I beat that game before ever attempting this one, so I was somewhat unaware of how much worse Pray for the Gods was, namely in how it massacres the mechanics of this game by making them tedious for the sake of tedium. I also know because I suffered through it and the game is like horrible, but nonetheless, having unlimited arrows that also feature basically no arc makes the first bit of this fight very enjoyable. From there, it comes down to being able to climb up Phalanx on one of its back dorsal fins so as to allow maximum damage, because this fight is beaten in multiple cycles, and after a short while it will drop back into the sand, resetting its airbags and weak spots. Phalanx's unique gameplay and design is exceptionally well done, magnified considering it's a boss relying on Argo gameplay.
This is a Colossus you either love or hate. I despised it my first time through because falling down means repeating almost the entire fight with no checkpoints of any kind. This is of course beyond frustrating, and about as fun as power drilling rusty scrap metal into your cockshaft. Once you master this fight, however, it becomes an ultra rewarding cinematic finale that I think deserves the #1 spot due to the atmosphere, music, and tension. The build up where you're platforming just to get close while it shoots stuff at you is really cool, and I love the juxtaposition of the dark rainy outside with the cozy tunnels below. Rain sound effects are just so nice when you're inside. I actually have one of those machines that mimic it in my bedroom. Just really great sound design overall for this phase. And actually climbing Malice, assuming you don't get sent tumbling down to square one of course, is I think one of the most enjoyable climbs in the game. He consists more of stone platforms than fur, which is nice since those are far less janky to climb for the most part. I will admit that it's kind of BS that you're expected to figure out that stabbing his hand will make him level it for you to take a shot at the minor shoulder sigil though. There are no prior instances in the game that would indicate you have to do this, so it's just totally out of left field. It's like in Cars when it says the AC is on low, but it still blows out hot air because it's a hot day out, and the solution is cranking the dial all the way to the left again even though it's already allegedly at low. I'm totally serious, my friend showed me this the other day and it's legit. What an obscure bullshit feature. I'm doing the world a big favor by making this public knowledge here. Anyways, it is nice that you can kill Malice pretty fast once you reach the top if you know what you're doing by retreating down his neck and going back to stop him from shaking too much. I can totally understand why some people think Malice is a miserable, unforgiving nightmare of a finale, but I think it's a challenge worth getting the hang of in the long run considering how replayable this game is.
Argus alongside Malice are the two most intricately designed Colossi, and in retrospect are probably my two favorites. Both are platforming puzzles, with Argus's challenge coming in arena and Malice in the design of himself. To progress throughout each floor of the arena, you have to bait Argus into doing a certain action that opens up a route to climb or ledge to jump onto to the regions beyond. Sometimes it's a bit unclear as to what exactly he does or happens when he does the intended action, but eventually you'll find your way onto the onlooking bridge where you bait him into smashing it and walking over. So far, I've found it impossible to beat Argus in one go, as the second weak point has you hanging from a ledge, i.e. a constant loss of stamina, although once you do manage to get to his elbow and knock that out, the ending is one of the best moments in the game, not to mention the satisfaction of completing such a grand puzzle. As the second to last Colossi, Argus delivers and thoroughly deserves his placement among the best in the game.
Avion is awesome when you aren't doggy paddling through the lake at 0.1 miles an hour to get back to the platforms. While I still love this fight, I must concede that a rather significant portion of your time is spent on this almost comically dull routine. This is felt even more because it's so awesome at every other point, like when you make the jump and grab on as Avion swoops down at you, and when you're navigating his wings hundreds of feet in the air. It's not unbearable or anything, and is sort of on par for the course considering Shadow of the Colossus is slow and clunky by design, but I really do think they should have made your swimming speed like twice as fast. That complaint disregarded, the spectacle of speeding through the air is a tough act to beat and is by far one of the most memorable Colossi along with Phalanx for this reason. It's also the first time in the game you hear a despair-filled farewell, which I think is not just the best track in the game but one of the most iconic in all of gaming. Most people, myself included, prefer Phalanx, but it's definitely not a total blowout difference in quality.
As you saw in the slide, there are a few bosses that I'd say are significantly better than Kuromori, but as a counter, because of the incredible design of well more than half of the Colossi found in this game, the top 5 are somewhat arbitrary for me personally. This is one of a very few that I didn't read or watch a guide on how to beat, and this decision ended up being very rewarding. Kuromori is set in a giant arena where you have to bait it into climbing onto a wall wherein you drop to the floor and hit it with arrows to stun it, in turn leaving its weak spot open. Because of how different the mechanic is, the cycle is never repetitive and you can beat it in 2 goes if you time everything to perfection. Nonetheless, Kuromori is far and away one of the best made Colossi, and with its extremely distinctive design earns a 2nd place billing.
Gaius and Phalanx are the 2 Colossi I most often see ranked as the best in the game, so I'm well aware that we're not breaking major ground here. Hell, even the developers seem to agree given they made him the main guy in the box art. The towering swordsman design is definitely one of the coolest Colossi, and it's easy to see why they went with it. Another great selling point is how creative you can get with how you take him down. While the intended route is to break his wrist brace by baiting a swing to the center of the plateau, you can also bypass it with a little creativity and careful jumping. It's intentional is the cool thing, you can tell because there's actually a trophy for doing it this way, which is a nice touch. The difference between this and, say, the alternate Phaedra trick is that the main route is actually logical and fun instead of cryptic and mind-numbing. I also once again must point out that Gaius' stomach weak point is probably the most satisfying in the game to stab at in my opinion. That aside, I still think I was more impacted by killing him than some of the others, even though he's not one of the peaceful ones. The music paired with the wide shot of the arena is just especially cinematic. I do want to talk about the music before the video ends also. The theme that plays when you kill the Colossi is part of a small eerie class of music like the Final Hours theme from Majora's Mask that just never fails to evoke emotion in me. Adds a lot to the game for sure. Gaius isn't my absolute favorite like he is Jack, since he's a bit on the simpler side no doubt due to his placement in the early game, but is unquestionably a great boss and deserving of high praise.
Thank you so much for watching, and we hope you enjoyed. This game immediately became one of our favorites, and the Colossi that made the grounds for it equally lived up to expectation. Remember to like and subscribe if you haven't so as to stay up to date on all future uploads, and otherwise be sure to check in every Wednesday for new rankings. That's all for now. Deuces.